would like to,
So we are open now for questions, comments. Please ask to the experts, to the podium, panelists, your questions. So we have Professor Aishi Baba, we have Amy Jacobs, you heard them giving the talks. We have Professor Jimmy So, Professor of Surgery from Singapore, and we have Hiromi Todoroki from the already mentioned Kibunuki group, which is active in Japan. Maybe as long as you're still thinking about your topics, we can read one of the comments that came in here via the internet. It was someone who is writing about his father, and I think we should not forget about the family members. I mean, this is absolutely part of this symposium. They are suffering as well, very much. He's writing about his father, who is 59 years old, was diagnosed with a stage 4 stomach cancer, peritoneal metastasis with a high peritoneal carcinomatosis index, so no option for surgery. He got a PIPEC procedure. Some of you may know what this is. It's a distribution of chemotherapy within the abdominal cavity. And they also started a chemotherapy. All the markers that you mentioned, Amy, are negative. He's microsatellite stable, no HER2 expression, no PD-L1 expression. So this worried son is asking about nivolumab or any other of the checkpoint inhibitors, if this makes sense here. It's a signet ring cell cancer, which is negative for all the markers that we have. Is there any comment maybe from Professor Baba? It's a very interesting question. We don't know where this person lives. There is different approval status in the world. It's possible to use it in that situation. In Japan, formally it's possible. It's also possible, but not recommended in the US. It's not possible in Europe. So there's variability among the globe. So what would be your scientific answer to that, or your answer as a doctor? This son is now sitting in front of you, is asking for his father, or the father is asking. What is your answer in that case?
For the patient, in Japanese health insurance situation, we can use combination chemotherapy plus nivolumab for the patient. However, we have data, or sub-analysis data of the phase 3 trials about expression level of PD-L1 molecule. So then we guess the efficacy of addition of the nivolumab plus chemotherapy may show the less effective. However, we can use it, and so in clinical practice, I could use this option.
I'm sorry.
Professor Brenner.
I'm sorry. We're missing the point. The first question is, what does the father want? Does the father want to live to see a grandchild? Does the father just want to be comfortable? So before we decide, the first question is, what does your father want? And he'll tell you the answer. I only doing this for my son is not a good answer.
thank you.
All of life is about expectations.
Yeah. So the family should worry about his father. So I would like to give some advice for him. Okay, thank you very much. So we'd like to move to the next important point, the discussion point. So as Professor Sasako said, the population receiving the subsequent chemotherapy after failure of the first and second line treatment, so that means that second line treatment or third line treatment, the population is quite different from the Japanese and the Western countries. So please explain I ask the doctor, please explain the situation in your country. So I'm sorry that Professor Ajani is not here, so we cannot hear about the U.S. situation. But at first, Professor Lodi explained the European.
Yeah, being specifically addressed. I think that it's a very multifactorial thing. There is not one answer to that. We have very experienced and academic centers where also many patients receive second, third-line therapies. Of course, we are completely aware that if there is an option to receive treatment and if there is a motivation from the side of the patient, we should try to offer the best option. On the other hand, we should not underestimate that in many parts of the Western world, patients are diagnosed late and they present with high tumor burden, and they easily get into critical performance status, which means it's not really to advise to give toxic therapy. They just don't tolerate it. It's not always that the doctors are missing the option. It's often just the case that the patients don't tolerate that anymore because the tumor burden is already so high, the symptom burden is so high that chemotherapy cannot tolerate it anymore, or there's organ failure. The disease destroyed the liver function or the kidney function, so toxic drugs cannot be given. I think that should not be underestimated, and this means that, of course, in the system, we should try to change something, to diagnose earlier, to follow up more intensively, not to lose the point where we can treat and really help patients with the drugs that are there and that are getting more. So that would be my comment here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And next, Professor Jimmy Sow, please explain your country situation.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I make any comments, I want to really thank the organizers and to organize this platform. And I have learned so much, and I want to thank all of you to be present here. You give me a lot of inspirations and educations. And sincere congratulations and deep appreciation from Amy here for your testimony. And I also just want to say some good word for Professor Baba. And then I was very impressed with his knowledge, his up-to-date educations, and appreciate that the knowledge of the clinicians, I think, is up-to-date, influential, important. And the way he speaks is so gentle. I feel very comfortable to be with him. And but back to the Professor Sasako's initial questions. We are thankful for the clinicians and the clinician scientists to develop research to have first line, second line, third line, and scientific evidence. And it's proof that they can prolong life, but this is in theory. In order to go through it, I think you need two things. One is the patient's own courage. And second is also, even if the courage, you also need the financial means. And that comes to the context of the individual countries. Being in Singapore is an Asian country, but it's a very westernized Asian country. Therefore, I think we represent many of the second generations Asians, the younger generation, I beg your pardon, the younger generations of the people in Asia or East Asia. And therefore, in terms of in finance, certainly different countries have different systems. We have a mixed system, therefore, and not everything is subsidized by the government. And that is certainly, some of them are out of pocket. And that also certainly restrict some of the limit, depending on the financial mean. But in terms of courage, I want to address that the field, how it's not us who go through it, it's the patient who go through the suffering and the treatment of the chemotherapy. And that's a three component. One is the understanding, therefore the knowledge that they transfer to the patients. Second is the own strength. Yeah, this own strength is certainly patient by patient. Some are mentally, emotionally stronger. And that part, I think spiritual certainly come into a big part. And thirdly is supporting members. And in the interesting that here you come to the Asian context. I think the family. I think what representing a lot of Chinese culture in Singapore, the family play a huge part in our patients. Many of our patients, especially the elderly, and because the younger generations are more educated, therefore, and the family tie are very strong. Therefore, a lot of the decisions may be different from Professor Brandon. A lot of the decisions the parents suffer elderly. They actually frankly told me that don't talk to me, just talk to my children.
They made their decision. That's good.
Yep. Yeah, that they trust.
Yeah, they said to the patient, "What do you want? I want you, my son, to look after me." That's fine.
Yeah, certainly understand. Therefore, we have to appreciate that and understand the context. And therefore, this is I think that the difference we paid in terms of the why they all go through why they in our context. Not only a certain group of people can receive second line, third line of chemotherapy, despite they have a scientific evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. So the most big problem is maybe a insurance issue. Okay, Jimmy. Okay. So Professor Baba, please explain the Japanese situation to the world.
As I explained, the percentage of the people, gastric cancer patient who had second-line cancer therapy was 80% in the clinical trials. However, based on the real-world data in Japan, shows around 60% of gastric cancer patients had a second-line chemotherapy. This difference, this 20% difference may depend on the general condition of the patient, because patients recruited in the clinical trial had better general condition without any severe organ dysfunction. So this is one reason why the decrease the number of the second patient who had a second-line chemotherapy. And then, as you talking about, financial situation is also important thing. I think there are no worry about the payment of the but patient can relatively easily access the second-line chemotherapy in the health under the system of the health insurance in Japan. So this is a reason why the percentage of second-line therapy is high, relatively high in Japan. Comparing the other countries, I can imagine these things.
Thank you very much. So, Ms. Todoroki, so could you give us some advice? Well, you have experience of your husband, so please give me advice from the patient family point of view.
Yes. At first, Kibon Kai was founded by my husband. My husband passed away 7 years ago. And when my husband was diagnosed 10 years ago, we didn't have opportunity to get to know about even though HER2 status. And to eliminate information gap is my husband's legacy. And I have one question. As a patient, we want to know our biomarker as much as possible before starting treatment. However, in Japan, it's common to check MSI status before second line. And chemotherapy doesn't work well for MSI high status, right? And so I think it's just curious. And so I want to ask to oncologist.
I think you're raising an important point for selecting the best therapy together with patients. And this is really an adequate and appropriate biomarker assessment. And not everything has to be done upfront. Currently in gastric cancer, we do not need a massive sequencing of the whole tumor for everyone, but the important markers need to be assessed. And I personally completely agree with you that these things should be done upfront. We should get the whole picture upfront to do a good planning together with the patient, what the different steps could be. And the interesting thing we have learned over the last years is that the biomarker status can also change. And Professor Baba mentioned that during his talk. The tumor can lose the HER2 positivity or can also gain something. So we are in a completely new world now, how we plan the treatment with our patients. We assess the biomarkers up front, and we should check for some specific changes also during the course of treatment. So this makes the whole thing quite complex. But thank you that you mentioned the biomarker topic, and I think we can and should work together there, because sometimes indeed this is forgotten or not done for what reasons ever. And it means missed chances or wrong planning. There is also a comment.
Yes, I'm Sato Kawakami from Kinda University. So talking about the MSI high, so it's a kind of regulatory issue. So in Japan, the pembrolizumab is only approved for the patient who are refractory to standard of therapy. So that's why the MSI cannot be tested prior to the first-line treatment. But practically, we have chemoplasnivo in first-line treatment for the HER2-negative disease. So MSI height is not necessarily needed for everyone, but in some cases, for example, for the patient who are kind of older patient and may not be fit for chemotherapy, for that patient, I think MSI high testing is very useful. And sometimes some MSI high patients are possibly a resistance to 5-FU-based chemotherapy. So in that case, I hope the MSI testing to be accepted as covered by the medical insurance in Japan prior to the first-line treatment. That's my comment.
Thank you very much. He's running. Sorry, please.
Sorry, I'm short. Sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Berhane with Bristol Myers Squibb. I have a question for Amy and Hiromi-san, because we have a unique situation where we're able to have the patient point of view in this opportunity, and we have people watching virtually. Amy, do you think you could share what is some of the psychosocial support and information you found useful during your treatment, so that maybe those who are interested in joining Kibonokai or who are watching can also think about this? And also, what's the best way to find out about patient advocacy support groups in Japan, in Korea, in China, in Singapore? If you could share some tips, so maybe those who are watching can learn. Thank you.
I didn't have any of that when I was diagnosed. I came into it laying on the couch, fatigued, and I looked on Facebook and found Debbie's Dream Foundation. Now it's a little different. We try and get the information into the doctor's offices, the hospitals. It has to go somewhere. We would hope we can get a nice audience here to take some of our brochures. I mean, it's a big effort. Sometimes social media is the place to start. You could guide them. And even the pharmaceutical companies, you're with BSM, Merck, they all can guide people to the different advocacy groups, because it's a nice tool. Speaking with other mentors, I didn't have a mentor until Debbie's Dream, and that's my mentor sitting right there. You'll meet her later in another one. So I just think that it's a really important part to have somebody to talk to. And it, I think, also alleviates on the doctors too, you know, to really be able to know the patient experience.
Thank you,
Is
Amy.
that good?
Yeah,
Thank you very much, Amy. And I just would like to add something. I think it's our duty our duty as treating physicians to give you the information who in the region can help you. I would not leave that to industry. I must be honest there. They have other interests. And it's the duty of the treating physicians to connect you.
Okay, so sorry. We would like to talk more, but time is up. So I would like to close this session. But very important point is we have to do best. So examining all biomarkers and use all available drugs as much as possible, and we should not give up the treatment as long as possible. So, and then the treatment should improve progress, and then some days we can obtain cure of it. Okay, thank you very much for your kind participation and kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marco.